Today, we're looking at a blue-black ink by Papier Plume, Midnight Black. Hi, I'm Adam, and I'm an ink guy. I get inks, test them, and share the results with you. Now, as always, there's timestamps down below so that if you're in a hurry, you can skip around. But if you got the time, check out the entire video. Also, if you're interested, you can follow me over on Instagram. And if you're new here, I would invite you to subscribe. I do a new ink review daily. In order to make sure I have a range of experience with this ink, I do the writing samples. I then put the ink into this Fountain Pen Revolution Himalaya with a flex nib. I wrote with it for a day, then used it to take the notes for this video. In order to have some standardization in my writing samples, I always use Clairfontaine, Tomoe River, and Rhodia paper. Now, let's look at the writing sample. I picked this ink up in sample form, so it came in a vial, like this one. And to keep my writing samples consistent, I use a Jinhao 159 with a Goulet 1.1 stub, a Jinhao X450 with a Goulet medium, and a Jinhao X750 with a Goulet extra fine. Let's take a look at the Clairfontaine. No bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather spread, halo sheen, and no shade. Now, I don't know if something happened right there that caused that odd spot, but I don't want to call that little bit of something happening, it has shading. The extra fine is slightly lighter than the stub. It has no feather spread, halo sheen. It does offer some shading, even with it being such a dark ink. The thing is, you have to see where the lighter spots are, like the WN is lighter, the AZ is lighter. It's the bottom of the G is lighter. This is a very dark, but it has some lighter areas that does show it has some shading. 11 seconds to dry. Medium is about the same tone that we're getting with the extra fine, but we actually get a lot more of the lighter tones. The medium has no feather spread, halo sheen. It does have some very nice shading. Look at what's going on in quick. Dark to light to dark. Brown starts dark and gets light. Fox starts medium, goes light, gets dark. 17 seconds to dry. Now the scrubby of the extra fine showed us no color variation, and it was much harder to see there than it was in a medium. The medium showed us plenty, and we get plenty. How about Tomoe River? No bleeding, normal Tomoe River ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather spread, halo sheen, and no shade. Now the extra fine is slightly lighter than the stub. It has no feather spread, halo sheen, no shade, 19 seconds to dry. The medium is the same tone as the extra fine. The medium has no feather spread, halo sheen, and no shade, 37 seconds to dry. Scrubby for both show us no color variation, and we didn't get any. I think this is a very saturated ink, if I'm making guesses. Rhodia, no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather spread, halo sheen, and no shade. Now the extra fine is ever so slightly lighter than the 1.1. It has no feather spread, halo sheen, and it does offer some shading throughout. Had to just alter some of my notes there looking at it. Like when you look at quick, it's very dark. It gets a little lighter in areas and then very dark again. Brown goes very dark to a little bit lighter. Fox, the top of the F, is darker than the bottom of the F, and then it gets very dark into the OX. Lazy is certainly lighter as a tone than the K or the B above it, and 9 seconds to dry. Now the medium is the same tone as the extra fine. It has no feather spread, halo sheen, and it still offers some decent shading just like we got with the extra fine. Brown starts dark and gets light. Fox, the top is darker than the bottom of the F, then it gets very dark into the OX. Jumps starts a little bit lighter and gets a very dark. It's interesting, looking at Lazy and looking at the B, different tones. The Y is definitely not as dark as the B. So there is shading, much more subtle. 16 seconds to dry. Scrubby, far left to far right of both, show much more color variation than we get in the writing, or it makes it more obvious and easier to see what kind of color variation we're going to get. I agree with Vita that we learn a lot by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is done the way it's supposed to be done. I put a line of ink down and immediately put it into water for 10 to 15 seconds. And we see this gray across the bottom that has immediately started to form a line. It has immediately started to bond with that paper. It didn't push up very far, not a lot of it moved. And the blue pushed, there's a water gap between that gray and the blue. Now the one on the right, I let dry for 10 minutes before I dunk it into water. That gray line on the bottom, much darker, much more there, really bonded with the paper, not really moving. I did not see as much water gap between that gray and the blue as I was really expecting here based on what happened in the first chromatography, but I think we know what kind of resistance we're expecting. Resistance tests are done to see how well this ink can be expected to perform on the page, and more importantly, how hard it might be to clean from your pen. I let the smear dry for 3 days before testing it. Looking at the highlighter, it performed well, as I was expecting it to do. This is a good ink to use in a note-taking situation because it really didn't move a whole lot. With that, the water didn't do much to get rid of this ink, not even a lot of the blue, only some of the surface darkest areas, but it left a lot of ink behind. Now, pen flush is starting to break it up, and it looks like it's starting to break up the grays that are underneath, because the gray we're seeing there is much lighter than the gray that was on the filter paper. So I do think that given a little extra time and some elbow grease, that should get it all out of your pen. But if it doesn't, the 1/3 bleach solution quickly through your pen, it completely obliterated it off the page. Just make sure that you rinse your pen with water immediately after, so you don't rust your metal bits. I test ink viscosity or flow by using a tilt test, and I've linked that video and put that in here for you. Now for the inks I've tested, I have found an average viscosity of 2.5, with the realm of normal being from 2.1 to 2.9. Papier Plume's Midnight Blue has a viscosity of 1.51. That makes this a very wet ink. To find my average dry times, I use my writing samples done on Clairfontaine, Tomoe River, and Rhodia paper. I average those. Now for the inks I've tested, I have found an average dry time of 17 seconds, with the realm of normal being from 13 to 21 seconds. Papier Plume's Midnight Blue has an average dry time of 19 seconds, so despite it being very wet, it is a normal dry time and the slower side of normal. Instead of finding inks that look like Papier Plume's Midnight Blue, I would prefer to find an ink that complements its color on the page. I wanted a nice orange, and I chose Krishna's Sunburst. The second writing sample is done on TWSBI, Moji, and Word paper. Here we're looking at TWSBI notebook papers. Now it's a thinner paper, and it is often a little more absorbent, but it has no bleeding and no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather spread, halo sheen, or shade. Now the extra fine is slightly lighter than the stub with no feather spread, halo sheen. Shading spots, there are some. The K is darker, the B is darker, the L is darker. The is darker than the words around it. So it is there, and it does show up, which it doesn't always do on TWSBI paper. 9 seconds to dry. Now the medium is much darker than the extra fine. It's a little darker than the stub. Medium has no feather spread, halo sheen, no shade, 15 seconds to dry. The scrubby of the extra fine, far left to far right, shows some color variation, and we did get it. The medium shows none, and we got none. How about Moji paper? Well, it's very thin, so it has no bleeding, and it really doesn't ghost. It's very nice. As a thin paper, it's still doing very well. The 1.1 has no feather spread, halo sheen, and no shade. The extra fine is slightly lighter than the stub with no feather spread, halo sheen, or shade, and 5 seconds to dry. The medium is by far the darkest tone on the page. No feather spread, halo sheen, no shade, 8 seconds to dry. The scrubby of the extra fine shows some color variation, but we're really not getting it. The medium shows none, got none. And Word notebooks. Not the greatest paper, however, I look at this as this is just a put it in your pocket notebook, jot down some ideas. This is the medium at the top with a lot of bleeding, a lot of ghosting. This is the extra fine with a lot of bleeding, a lot of ghosting. Neither of them touch the page underneath, so that's kind of a win if you just sort of balance some things out. With that in mind, the medium has a ridiculous amount of feathering and quite a bit of spread. That medium goes down about like a double broad. It's really got a lot of spread. You have to write really big
to be able to make sure you can still read with this. No halo, no sheen, no shade. The extra fine has a ton of feathering all over it, just smaller than you got with the medium. But it's ridiculously feathered. It's horrible. It does have spread. That extra fine is about a medium. It has no halo, no sheen, no shade. It only took 1 second to dry. The scrubby shows no color variation, and there wasn't any, and that is all that I have for the writing sample. So what do I think of Papier Plume's Midnight Black? As a blue black, it's a little bit darker blue that does offer a little bit of shading towards black. But you can easily lose that depending on the pen that you choose, which in itself is its own problem. It's a little bit darker blue black than the blue black I'm most accustomed to. So what nib and pen give the best writing experience with this ink? To tone down that dark blue to black, I would go with a dry fine or dry medium. That's going to allow the blue to black transition be there and really make your writing look beautiful. I put out a new ink review every single day, so that if you're not already subscribed, I'm going to remind you, go ahead and subscribe. Thanks for watching.